Hello there, and welcome back to the Chap's Guide, the channel where we take you on a journey of exploration into the topics of men's style, self-development and personal grooming. And today, well, it's been a video that's been a long time coming. Because you've seen the thumbnail, you know what it is. It's time for me to review my watch, this Rolex GMT Master 2, reference number 126711CHNR, also referred to as the Rolex Root Beer. And it's a watch which I've owned now since October 2020, so well over 6 months ago. I have given this watch a thorough wearing in everyday life, as well as, you know, all the circumstances that I encounter as I go through my journey. And I think I'm at a position where I'm ready to talk about it, to give you my thoughts, my views, and to let you know whether I think it's a good watch or a watch that I would buy again. So let's have a look at it first. So here is our GMT watch in all its glory, in some glorious spring sunshine. I apologise for the sound of crunching in the background. That's my horse standing nearby and nibbling on the grass in the background. So aesthetically, the GMT borrows heavily from its older sibling, the Submariner. It has that very distinctive oyster case, which, you know, people will recognise. And I think when the GMT was available with the black bezel, you know, you'd be pretty hard to pressed to be able to recognise the Sub and the GMT from a distance. But I think now the GMT has, you know, it's carved a niche as the slightly more stylish member of the Rolex family, due to its, you know, various iterations where you'll find it coming in different colorations on the bezel. In this case, this particular model has a black bezel at the top half, indicating the nighttime hours, and at the bottom half we have this glorious chocolate brown colour, which is interesting to say the least. You know, brown, not a colour which is often considered a marketing hit, but I think in combination with the ever rose gold, it works exceptionally well in this case. Now, if you want to look at the statistics, there's nothing to look at in the back of these watches. There's no movement to see because there's no case back on these where you can see within, but inside beats the 3285 movement, which is an updated movement for this watch, introduced with this watch in 2018, and it gives the watch a number of advantages over perhaps the earlier iterations, not least of which being the 70-hour power reserve which this watch now boasts. Why is that important? Well, it's what we call weekend proof. If you think of it, you can take this watch off on a Friday night and put it on a Monday morning, and it's still going to be ticking, still keeping that certified chronometer time for you. So handy if you don't want to fiddle around setting the time and the date and the GMT hand. So the 70-hour power reserve, a great advantage. Now, its construction, as you can see, is predominantly stainless steel. The oyster case is made of stainless steel, but it's accented with an ever rose gold crown and an ever rose gold bezel, as you can see, which fits atop of that oyster case, with the inset being set with those different colours. The bracelet itself, again, stainless steel on the outer links of the oyster bracelet, and the inner links being made of solid 18 karat ever rose gold, giving the watch a slightly greater heft than standard stainless steel models, but not really discernible, I would say personally. Its size is a very classic 40mm across the dial, eminently wearable for gentlemen of modestly small wrists. I mean, my wrist is just over 6.5 inches, and this fits pretty perfectly on me, and I think it can be worn by people up to sort of 8.5 inch wrists, should you wish to do so. Its lug size is 20mm across. I don't think anybody would want to, you know, swap this onto anything other than the glorious oyster bracelet which it comes with, but it tapers down by a couple of millimeters to the clasp, the oyster clasp, as you can see. Again, that ever rose gold running through the oyster clasp, which is opened by just flicking it open, the safety keeper, and then you pop open the clasp by just turning it upwards, and there we have nice easy clasp. Now within the clasp we have the easy link arrangement, so click it open and you get an extra 5mm of bracelet size for those days where you just feel, you know, you need to have that bit of extra breathing room for your wrist. Perhaps it's a particularly hot day, and your wrist is swollen up with a bit of blood pressure clicking through those veins in the wrist, and when it's a normal day again, you just, and it's sometimes not the easiest to do, but click it back in, and there we are, back to its original size. Nice and secure, as you'd expect from a sport watch. You just get it in the right way, click it shut, put the keeper over, and there we are, safe and secure. So there we are, that's pretty much the root beer watch as you can see it. I didn't mention that the crown is a screw down crown, of course, giving us, and it's a trip lock crown, giving us 100 meters of water resistant. Many people hypothesize that of course the watch could go far deeper than that because it's constructed in, well, it's not dissimilar to the sub, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if you could do a lot better than 100 meters, but I don't think anybody would want to take it to that sort of depths. And thickness wise, 12 millimeters. So 1 millimeter less than the Submariner, its cousin. You wouldn't think that millimeter would make much difference, but I have to say I own a Submariner Rolex and they wear quite significantly differently. The sub feels bigger, not in a bad way. It's a bigger, robust, more practical tool watch. This root beer feels a little bit more dressy and perhaps nimble, and that extra 1 millimeter less of depth makes it feel a little bit like that. Bit of a better look at that dial now, and as you can see the dial is black. Some of the earlier iterations of the root beer actually had a brown dial, but this particular model, in keeping with all of its cousins within the GMT range, has a black dial. And as you can see, the date complication is visible at the 3 o'clock under a Cyclox magnifier, giving us 2.5 magnification. Now you'll see that the hands and the indices are made of 18 karat Everose gold as well. So keeping, in keeping with the coloration of this watch. And the GMT hand in this case is Everose gold too. You can see it, it's just about at the 1800 hour marker on the bezel there, so you can just see it there, kind of obscured by the other hands, but the GMT hand has a large arrow on the end of it, making it quite easy to read, perhaps less so than the coloured GMT hands you might see on the Pepsi and the Batman, but it's very practical and very capable. And again, that bezel, that beautiful chocolate brown coloration, working wonders with that Everose gold. Of course, the GMT watch was introduced into the Rolex catalogue in the 1950s predominantly as a tool watch. It was introduced for airline pilots who, for the first time, as they were traversing different time zones in a single flight, wanted to be able to keep track of time zones in their home base and their destination. And in order to do that, Rolex simply introduced a GMT complication to the watch, which effectively means that there is an additional hand on the dial, which takes a full 24 hours to circumnavigate the dial. And in conjunction with the bezel, which has the hour increments on it, it allows you to keep track of more than one time zone at the same time, effectively. And by being able to move the bezel in a multi-directional way, it is possible to even keep track of a third time zone if you've got your wits about you. I've never found the need to do that, but it is an eminently quite a practical complication. Although today, it's fair to say, I think, it's no longer used in that tool manner, and certainly not in precious metal configuration as we see today with the Everose gold. Does any tool watch need to be made of a precious metal? I would argue probably not. Now, the GMT range, I think, remains one of the most popular ranges in the Rolex catalogue. The watch comes in a whole manner of different configurations, the stainless steel models being exceptionally sought after, particularly the Batman, the blue-black variation, and the Pepsi, the blue and red variation, now both available on the Jubilee and the Oyster bracelet, like the one we see here today. So eminently very collectible, very desirable, exceptionally hard to get your hands on. So why is this watch nicknamed the Root Beer? Well, it's because a previous iteration of this model was called the Root Beer, and that got that association with a soda drink, which obviously root beer tends to have a brown coloration to it, and that original watch made by Rolex did have in fact a brown dial, whereas the modern version I have here has a black dial. Some purists would say this isn't really a root beer because of that black dial, but I think the nickname has stuck, and it's certainly a lot easier to say root beer than reference number 126711 Chnr in conversation. So I think root beer is quite adequate. I don't really care about its history, but I refer to it as a root beer, and I think, you know, it kind of suits the watch. So our good friend here, the root beer, is currently the only watch in the GMT range which is available in a two-tone configuration, meaning two different materials brought together, the stainless steel and the Everose gold. Now the GMT range has a number of other watches in precious metal. You know, you can have an entirely Everose gold model like this, costing I think in excess of £30,000. You can have an entirely white gold model, I think costing even more than that. But this one, with the Everose gold in the centre links of the bracelet, on the bezel and the crown, is a nice combination of both of those colours. And it brings them together in a lovely warmth, I think, within this watch itself. The Everose gold, of course, being Rolex, can't just be any old Everose gold or pink gold. Everose gold is a special combination of gold, 18 karat yellow gold, combined with some platinum, some copper and some silver to lock in the colour. Rolex make the bold claim that the Everose gold will never discolour, it will never tarnish in its lifetime, and as Rolex creates its own gold in its own foundry using all of those components, I'm inclined to go along with their views on it. I've owned this watch for only 6 months, and you know, its colour hasn't varied in the slightest. Perhaps you wouldn't expect it to. And as all of the gold on this watch, including the indices, the hands, the bezel, crown and so on, are 18 karat Everose gold, I can only hope that that colour will continue to last and look as brilliant and as beautiful as it is today in the many years to come, whilst it remains in my ownership. So what attracted me to the Rolex root beer? What made me want to add this to my very small collection of watches? Well, it's fair to say I'm a bit of a Rolex fan. I've got two other Rolex watches, a Datejust Classic 36mm and also a Submariner. So, you know, you might say the absolute dyed-in-the-wool Rolex models which a collector might desire to have. Why did I want to go to the GMT? Well, I like GMT complications for a start. It's a very practical watch. I do have friends who live abroad, and I do use the GMT complication to keep track of other time zones to make sure that I'm not, you know, sending a text in the middle of their nighttime. I do have a Tudor GMT watch, so I'm familiar with the GMT complication and its practicality. So I was really delighted to add a Rolex GMT, a very capable watch, into my collection. I also, as I said, I own a couple of stainless steel wristwatches, and do you know what? Much as I like stainless steel, I know it's very much on trend at the moment. You know, people are trampling over their grandmothers to get the stainless steel versions of this watch, and I've got some very good relationships with some authorised dealers. I've no doubt if I'd, you know, entered into a dialogue about obtaining a stainless steel GMT, I could have acquired one. But I was really attracted to some colour. I really like gold. I mean, I'll be honest, if I had the money, this would have been in solid Everose gold, not two-tone. But, you know, whereas this watch isn't inexpensive, it's a £12,000 watch at the current Rolex catalogue prices. You know, the all-gold version of this is £30,000, really unachievable by pretty much most people. This was a nice compromise for me. I like the colour. The warmth of the Everose gold really attracted me. Now, I like all gold, to be honest. I'm quite an elemental guy, you know. I like that gold on the periodic table, but the yellow gold, 18 karat, which most other Rolex two-toners come in, you know, the Submariner two-tone, it's clearly very strong colour. It's yellow. It's easily recognisable as gold. Some might say a little ostentatious. The Everose gold, a little bit more muted. It's a pink gold, obviously. Rolex call it Everose gold, but it flies that little bit under the radar. And yeah, it clicked with me. I saw the watch. As I say, I would never have thought that brown would have been a colour I would have, you know, entered into my wardrobe, really, or my watch collection. But the brown on the dial, the chocolate, marries exceptionally well with that Everose pink gold, and it just works for me. And I really do enjoy this watch when I wear it. What can I say? I wear this watch and it makes me feel a little bit special. And well, you know, what more can you ask of your timepiece that it heightens your mood and makes you feel a little bit special. So yeah, very much enjoy wearing this one. So no watch is perfect, and I like when I do a review on a watch to talk about some pros, talk about some cons. I'll talk about the pros, the positives when it comes to this watch. First of all, it's accessible, right? You can get your hands on it. I've made a video about my purchasing experience of buying this watch, and I was able to access it within 1 month of waiting, more or less. I made a couple of inquiries with a couple of authorized dealers, and yes, I was able to get hold of this watch at its normal retail price. It still retails, if you look on Chrono24 and other, you know, watch auction platforms, above its market value for people who don't want any weight whatsoever. And I believe it depends where you live in the world, how fortunate you are with your relationship with your authorized dealer, how quickly you can realize your desire to owning this watch. But it's a lot easier to get hold of than a stainless steel watch of this model, of this range. So yes, that's a positive. You can actually get your hands on it. The second positive for me is the color. Now, for me, I wasn't attracted by its accessibility. I would have been happy to wait for, you know, a Batman or a Pepsi model, but I loved the gold. I'm a bit of a gold fan, and having this available in Everose allowed me to bring some gold into my collection, my watch wearing sort of rotation, without being too ostentatious and without, you know, looking too blingy. So for me, that was a real plus point. And the size as well is very much a plus point for me. It's a 40mm, it's a classic 40, wears slightly larger as many of the Rolex Oyster cases do, but because it's only 12mm thick, I think it's eminently wearable by gentlemen perhaps who are slightly more modest on the wrist size. I'm only an average size guy, all right? So I'm about 5'10", of average stature. I wear medium in all of my clothes. I'm a 6.5-inch wrist, so I'm kind of your Joe average physical specimen of a man. And this watch fits me, to my eye, perfectly. Any bigger, I would probably feel a little uncomfortable with it. Any smaller, perhaps wouldn't look like a classic sports watch. But yeah, that's one of the plus points. And finally, on a plus point, it is a professional range Rolex. It's tough, it's rugged, it's waterproof to 100 meters. It's got that screw down crown. It's not a watch that you have to baby. You can wear it, it's tough, it's robust, you know, it's gonna last for decades and decades. Like all Rolex pieces, you know it's been built like a tank. No watch is perfect, and neither is this one. So, you know, I've observations which actually would class as cons. Firstly, the gold on it. I love it. It brings it, you know, a lovely warmth and depth of colour to this watch to my eye, but it does make it a little bit more ostentatious than the stainless steel version. So if you're walking around the middle of central London or another major city, wherever you live in the world, and you're sporting this on your wrist, maybe it's summertime, you're wearing short sleeves, it's more obvious, you're not wearing it under a suit. There are people who will notice this watch, they will covet it, and there may be even gangs of organised criminals, as we see in London and other major cities, who will target you as a victim because they want to remove your watch from your possession. So there is that to it. You know, it is certainly more noticeable than another stainless steel version from the range. Its price, it's expensive. You know, it is £11,850, which is a substantial amount of money. Now for me, this watch was purchased as something of a landmark moment in my life. I retired from a lifetime profession and I decided to buy this watch to mark that moment in my life. So for me, it was an investment I was prepared to make. But, you know, it's a bit rich for many people's pockets, and there's not that much gold in it. It's hard to understand why it's so expensive, but whilst it still retails for above its market value, its retail price, I don't mind. I made an investment. I could realize that investment if I sold this watch on. I can even make a little profit from it. So, you know, from that point of view, the price isn't quite so worrying, but it is an expensive piece. And finally, is it really a two watch, having so much gold in it? Truth is, it certainly isn't. You know, I don't believe any airline pilots would be wearing a GMT these days. They're too expensive. Certainly not one with precious metal within it. And when it comes to this particular model, the centre links are actually, of course, made of high polished Everose gold. And a lot of people who wear watches detest the fact that their watch gets marked, it gets little scratches on it, micro scratches. It'll certainly take up nicks and burrs on that gold as time goes on. Mine certainly has. And if you're somebody who's a little bit, anal about keeping your watch in absolutely perfect condition, it's going to be a challenge for you wearing this watch, because they do get little marks on them. Gold is inherently a less robust metal than the stainless steel around it. So it's gonna take up little scratches. You've just got to be prepared for that. It doesn't bother me. I know that when I wear this watch and it takes on little marks, that's just part of the watch being within my journey, and that's my signature on the watch in a way. But you need to be aware that this isn't something which can be kept in pristine condition, because the gold is softer than stainless steel. So what is my observations, my final summing up about the Rolex Root Beer GMT? Well, as I clip it back on, I love this watch. It is almost certainly my favourite watch in my small Rolex collection of only 3 watches, but I've got some of the classics now. I've got the Datejust, I've got the Submariner, and I've got the GMT. And I feel pretty complete. There's not much more I think I would like to add to my watch collection, because when I wear a suit, I tend to wear my Datejust. It's small, it's classic, it's beautiful. When I'm doing something a bit more robust and rugged, the Submariner has got me covered. And the GMT is for occasions when I want to feel special. Now that might just mean wearing it every day, around the house, or out and about in the wider world, or up here in the countryside, where I spend a lot of my time. The watch makes me feel good. The gold brings a certain colour and a radiance to the piece, which it just makes my heart lift when I wear it and I glance down to tell the time, and I'm met with those beautiful colours. What more could a man ask from his watch? Would I buy it again? In a heartbeat. Absolutely so. If I didn't own it now, I would want to own it in the future. It's been a very welcome addition to my watch collection. And if you're eagle-eyed and you watch any of my other videos, you'll probably see this on my wrist more than any other watch in my collection. Now, I made a whole video about my ownership my purchasing experience around this watch. I'll link that in the drop down box below. You might want to discover more about the journey I went on to reduce this into my collection, but I'll link that for you to look at in your own time. I hope you've enjoyed this review after 6 months of ownership of the Rolex Root Beer. If you have, and you're not a subscriber, first of all, I would encourage you to subscribe, click the red button, give us a thumbs up, and leave me a comment in the comment section below. I would be delighted to hear your views and your thoughts on this watch or any other watch which, brings joy to your heart. Now, until the next time, take care of yourselves, and I will see you again very soon.